We are filming today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive. My name is Monk Rowe, and we are in Manhattan. I'm very pleased to have Marty Napoleon with me today, who is a jazz pianist with a long and successful career, and just learned quite a collector and annotator of your own career, too. So welcome.
Thank you, Monk. It's a pleasure to meet you.
You seem to have a lot of enjoyment in your career, and that you've saved all this material, and I'm very proud of your travels.
Oh, yes. Well, a funny thing is about my traveling and about my performances as a piano player. People have often asked me after a concert, they would come up to me, or during concert on the break or something, and say, "Are you really having that much fun, or are you just doing that for for cameras and stuff?" I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. What would you like to do more than anything in the world? What's your favorite hobby?" And somebody would, yes, baseball or football, golf,
Yeah.
So if they say, "I like to golf," I say, "Okay, all right, you like to golf? You love it with all your heart?" Yeah, I guess so. Well, suppose you went out golfing every day of your life and you got paid for it. Well, it's like the baseball players, right? These guys, they love to play baseball. They go out and they get paid. Golfers love to golf and they get paid for it. I play the piano. And I'm so lucky to have people pay me for what I'm playing. I mean, come on. Why shouldn't I be happy up there? I love it. It's great. I'm having a ball.
Can you recall at what age did you think that you could actually make a career as a musician?
I recall every day of my life, just about. I swear. Really, I remember asking my mother a question once where I said, "Mom, you remember when you were scrubbing the floor in the kitchen?" And she uttered some obscenity about some neighbors or somebody, and I said, "Were you talking about me?" She said, "No, honey, not you. No, I mean them, So I said, "How old was I there?" She says, "You were 2 years old." And then after that, she said, "I thought you were going to be a school teacher," because I used to stand up by the time I was 3 or 4 years old. I used to stand on the chair by the kitchen table and bang the table and speak gibberish.
Oh.
She thought I was making speeches, which I was. I was making speeches and banging my hand on a fist on the table. So I remember all of these crazy little things, But as far as being a musician or a piano player, well, the fact is that when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I had a brother who was like 4 or 5 years older than I, and he was a kind of like a Danny Kaye kind of character. He was crazy. He was like a nut job, He used to do all these crazy emotions, and he used to sing like comedy songs, and I used to sing harmony to him.
Wow.
And my father, who was a banjo player, said, "This kid's got a great ear," And I had a good ear because I could hear harmonies at the time I was about 7 years old. And when I used to go to school, the grammar school, we'd sit in the auditorium and they say, "Everybody stand up, we're going to sing the Star Spangled Banner." And the kids would be singing, "Oh, say, can you see?" And I was singing, "Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?" And the kid next to me says, "Hey, you're singing it wrong." I said, "Shut up, I know what I'm doing." I was singing counter harmonies.
Right.
I mean, this is what I heard, And the funny thing is, to jump ahead of myself, when I was with the Chico Marx band, one of my first big bands, actually there was a band before him, it was my first big band, but Chico Marx was my first name band, big band. Yeah. And we played, the Chico Marx is the Marx Brothers, and I was on the road with that band for a year and a half. My wife, we had just gotten married, and we were on the road, and we were doing mostly theaters anyway, and we'd have each town we'd go to every week. We were in a different town, and we'd have an 8 o'clock rehearsal in the theater, and they'd have like people like Larry Adler, who was my biggest nightmare because he was playing all these Rhapsody in Blue and Ravel's Bolero, and I couldn't read note one. So I was faking everything. In fact, the first band I was with a guy named Bob Astor's band, and we had a kid on trumpet named Neil Hefty, who was writing arrangements for the band, and Bob would say every Monday he had to bring an arrangement for Tuesday rehearsal, or Monday rehearsal, whatever. And he'd say, Neil, during the week, he'd say, Neil, how you doing with the arrangement? Neil said, you'll have it in time, don't worry. Came Monday for the rehearsal, he never got to the rhythm section. He would finish the arrangement because he couldn't write a score.
Well, he just wrote the parts individually as he went
What he
along.
did was, Neil Hefti was rooming with Shelley Mann, the drummer.
Mhm.
And Shelley used to complain because Neil didn't know how to write a score, so he would whistle the arrangement, the entire arrangement, from the introduction, chorus, modulation, out chorus, choruses, background choruses, everything. He would whistle each part, and after he finished the lead trumpet, he would throw it on the floor and look at it and harmonize it. And he was whistling all night long, and Shelley used to call him the whistler. He says he drove me crazy. In fact, at night, he'd have all these parts on the floor, and I would get up to go to the bathroom. He'd say, watch it, Shelley, you're stepping on my baritone clock. He says, I felt like I was walking through a cow pasture.
That's fascinating.
It was unbelievable. And Neil and I were one day coming down in the elevator in the hotel going to work, you know, and he says to me, you know what my biggest thrill would be in life? My ambition, that's what he said. Mm-hmm. My ambition is to someday write for Count Basie's
All
band."
right.
Do you think he achieved his life?
I guess so.
Oh, God.
You know, it might have been an advantage for you that he didn't get to the piano part, because he might have written something very difficult if you weren't a reader at the time.
Well, actually, what happened was he would pass out the parts at the rehearsal, see?
Yeah.
And the bass player's name was Marty, too. See? And, well, he was Marty, too. I was Marty 1 or vice versa.
Yeah.
And Shelley was the drummer. And he would give us blank manuscripts and would say, Shelley, Marty, 1, bass, Marty bass, and Marty piano. The only reason we know it was piano was on the left-hand side it said piano, and the manuscript was empty. And I'd say, hey, Neil, when are you going to write me a part? I'm trying to learn how to read music,
Yeah.
you know? So anyway, to get back to Chico, I couldn't read.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't learned yet because I was like scuffling. So when we got to Chico's band, and I was like playing these shows with comedians and dancers, I was lucky that we had an 18-piece orchestra. And fortunately, I had what they called a piano conductor part. And on the top, in red ink, was what the lead trumpet was playing.
Okay.
See?
Yep.
So now I would fake through the first show, and from the second show on, I would follow the red line, the red notes on the piano sheet, see?
Mm-hmm.
And I would notice, like, whenever the band had an eighth rest and a dotted quarter, I know it always went boom, shabba, that, you know. I said, hey, that's great, you know.
Okay.
By the time I left that band, I was reading music.
That's fascinating. And that must have been standard procedure for those arrangers back then to put the trumpet part in red.
No, there was no, it wasn't that. It was the people who had the act, like the dancers, the dance team, or the comedian, or the harmonica player, whoever. They would hand out their parts. It wasn't the orchestra parts. It was the parts from the act that we were playing.
I see.
And they had, because when they didn't know, they would say, well, this is the drummer's part, and this is the saxophone player's, and this is the piano conductor. Of course, the piano player was usually the conductor. See? And they would say piano conductor. So I was lucky because all of those things had those red lines, red music dots on there. And that's how I learned how to read. In fact, the funny thing was, only about 3 years ago, my wife and I were sitting in the living room, and I said, well, you know, I scuffled during Chico's band because I couldn't read. She said, you didn't know how to read when we were with Chico's band? She never even knew
Wow,
I couldn't
that's
read. Because we were too busy. We had just gotten married. We were busy doing something else.
And that was what year?
1942. February. I joined him in February 42.
Now, you, having come from a musical family,
Exactly.
can I assume that it was okay with your parents that you were going into this field?
As a matter of fact, that's funny you lead me into that, because when I started going with my wife, I met my wife when we were both 18 years old. Obviously, we're the same age. Just about. And we kept company for about 2 years. But after about a year, my father said to me, you can't keep company with that girl. I said, why not? He says, you planning on marrying her? I said, yeah. He said, well, you can't even think about that. I said, why? He says, she's going to keep you away from studying the piano. How'd you like to
Wow.
have parents like that?
That's a turnaround.
Well, see, my
Yeah.
father, you talk about a musical family.
Really?
My father played banjo and guitar. My mother played guitar. I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My brother Teddy was a piano player.
Right.
My brother Andy was a drummer. Both my sisters were singers. My sister Margaret married a piano player named Shorty Allen, and my sister Josephine married a saxophone player named Bill Shine. Fantastic lead alto man. And my grandfather, my father's father, played guitar. And my aunt, he was living with his daughter Josephine until he died. And she said the day he died, he was sitting with the guitar in his hand. He was strumming the guitar.
Wow.
And then his father played guitar. So it went way back with the guitars and the music and everybody. In fact, when I started this project with a book, people used to say to me, how many musicians in your generation, your family, are musically inclined or jazz or whatever? I said, I don't know. I started counting them, and I got to 50, and I lost count. Because not only my family, but my mother's side,
Well, your uncle,
Phil Napoleon.
Phil.
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
Trumpet.
so the thing is, to start it off this way, I usually start off my interviews by saying, my father was the oldest of 5 brothers and 1 sister. All of the boys were professional musicians. And my father was the oldest, and he played the banjo and guitar. My uncle George Napoleon, played saxophone. My uncle Teddy was a drummer. My uncle Joey was a saxophone player. And who else? There was 5 brothers. Pop, Georgie, Teddy, Joey. There's another one.
And Phil.
And Phil. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, of course.
Right.
And Phil, I forgot that. And Phil. All musicians.
Yeah.
Now, before my uncle Phil Napoleon passed away, he called me about once every week and a half, 2 weeks like that. He would call me because he wanted me to have the cemetery plots. He wanted to leave them to me because I was the last surviving Napoleon on his side. And he would tell me stories about my father. And he said, you know, when your father was about 18 years old, 19, 18, he bought a trumpet because he wanted to play the trumpet. And he started a jazz club, like I forget the name of it now. He told me what the name was, I can't remember. The Aerosmiths or something, the Arrow Club. And they used to chip in dues to belong to this jazz club, the society. And he said, and he used to put the trumpet in the closet on one of the shelves. And Phil was about 5 years old, and he found the trumpet one day, and he started fooling with it. Next thing, he was getting sounds, and my father caught him one day playing about a year later. Excuse me. And he says, I'm going to switch to guitar. He says, because banjo. He says, I can never do what you're doing, and he was 5 years old.
Wow.
So what happened was my father used to do dates, and he would bring Phil with him on the job at 5 years old. And during the course of the evening, he would make an announcement about his kid brother and put a chair on the middle of the floor, put him on that chair, and he would play the trumpet. People went absolutely bananas.
Little Mozart.
Yeah, he was great.
Wow. Well, you had your career started when the big bands were pretty healthy.
Right.
And you obviously did marry your wife. Well,
Yes.
it stood the test of time anyway.
Oh, well, I'm telling you, and then we went back to my mother's house after we got married. She lived a block away, and we had a sandwich and a glass of milk, and my wife walked me to the subway, and I went back to Pennsylvania, and I finished 2 weeks with the band, and I did my honeymoon alone in Buffalo.
Oh,
I said, man, nobody's had a honeymoon like
wow.
this. I spent my honeymoon alone
In Buffalo.
in Buffalo.
In the winter.
Cold.
My God.
It was cold. I can't believe how cold it gets in Buffalo. And anyway, that's what happened. So listen to this now. Here's another funny story. I get back to New York, and now we're married, right? So we check into the Forest Hotel, and the band that I was with has some time off. Excuse me. So we get married, and we checked into the Forest Hotel on 48th Street in New York, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, the phone rings. 4 o'clock in the morning. And I can't even find the phone. It's like on the floor. So I said, hello? Who's this? Marty, this is Shelley Mann. I said, what's happening, Shelley? He says, we're having a jam session at the Capitol Hotel in the ballroom. I says, I'll be right there. So I hung up the phone, and I'm getting, my wife says, where are you going? I said, Shelley said they're having a session. So she says, you're not going without me. So we got our clothes on. We went over there, and about 30 years later, I'm doing a club date, a Jewish wedding someplace, and the drummer was a club date leader, you know. He says, hey, Marty, do you know that when you got married, you went to a jam session at the Capitol Hotel? I said, how'd you know that? He says, I was playing drums. Oh. And he says, you know what? I looked over, and your wife was sitting in the corner by you on the piano, falling asleep. He says, how dare you? And my wife says, yeah, if I knew he was going to do that, that would have been it. That would have been it right there. I would never have stayed with him.
You know, I think some scriptwriter must have known about this, because that's the scene in the Glenn Miller story of the movie.
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He gets married, he goes back to the hotel, and all the guys show up his thing, and they go down and they hear Louis Armstrong.
I got a picture here of that. Yeah, when we did that scene.
Yeah.
I got the scene here.
That's
I got
wild.
a picture in the book, yeah.
Cool.
So it's a strange marriage. It was a strange, I'll tell you.
Well.
But it was great because we, you know, and funny, when I did get married, and I told my father we got married, and he gave me a can opener. He said, here, you're going to need this. I said, what, are you kidding? My wife's going to be a great cook, because she had never cooked before. Oh, she was a dressmaker, and she used to go to work every day. And she'd come home, and her mother had dinner for us. He says to me, here, you're going to need this. And she said, how dare you, Father? He said, I was going to be a can opener. So we went on the road, and instead of staying in hotels, there was a trombone player named Chuck Maxon with Chico Marx Band. He and his wife were married 10 years, and he was old hand at being on the road. So we kind of hung out because his wife and my wife became very good friends. And she'd say, don't stay in the hotel. All the band would go in the hotel. He'd say, we don't stay in hotels. We stay in hotels, what do they call them, with kitchenettes. Yeah. You know, because we're going to be in each town for a week. So rather than just spend rent money, we could cook and you save some money. And my wife learned how to cook that way. Wow. It was great. I loved it. It was just it's a fascinating story. And people ask me these questions all the time about my life on the road. When I tell them these stories, my wife says, you're a blabbermouth, because I never stop. I said, I can't help it. I just love it. I love talking about it because everybody's fascinated by what we went through. I mean, there are stories that are incredible.
Did it get to the point where you had had enough of it?
Never.
Never.
Oh, until now. Yeah. The only reason I don't work as much as I did now is my wife isn't feeling well. So I decided, hey, I've been on the road over 50 years, and she's waiting for me all this time. Now I'm going to spend some time with her, and you know, that's why I carry my phone with me all the time. I keep track of her. My daughter's calling. Keep track. She's got her girlfriend sitting with her. She's not well at all, you know. So.
Well, you have played with an amazing list.
Did you see that list I gave you?
Yes, I'm looking at it.
Oh, are you looking?
I have my own little
you have
sheet
your own
here
thing.
too.
Oh, I see.
Joe Venuti, some really marvelous, not only musicians but characters.
Joe Venuti himself was a character, unbelievable. I was telling a story just the other day about Joe Venuti. We played Palisades Park. Do you remember that name at all?
Sure.
Palisades Park? Well, when we played Palisades Park in New Jersey, Cliffside someplace, and we used to do on Saturdays a matinee, and right outside the park was an Italian restaurant. And we'd go there for dinner, and Joe knew the bosses, which didn't matter anyway, but we would sit there and he would tell us stories. And we did more laughing than eating. He was a very funny guy. There are stories about Joe Venuti that you don't believe. And I've got some in my book that are incredible. You know, about one where we were working at a park in Lincoln, not Nebraska, Lincoln Park in Massachusetts someplace, Bedford, New Mass. Anyway, it was an outdoor park. It was an amusement park. And it was September. We were freezing. Guys were wearing overcoats and gloves. I was playing the piano with gloves on. So Joe
with the violin.
No, he took a chair and he broke it up and he said to the band boy, go get some hot dogs, some weenies, go buy some weenies. And the kid went to the store to buy the weenies. He came back and Joe took the chair and broke it up and built a fire on the bandstand. And he took the weenies like this and he was sitting there while the band was playing. The kids were dancing and he was roasting hot dogs. See? And the manager came running. He was furious because the kids, instead of dancing, they came around to watch the band. He said, tell us what this guy doing. He's cooking frankfurters. So the manager went crazy. He says, what are you doing? He says, what? Joe was very cool. He used to look at you this way and bite his lips saying, what's wrong? What's the matter? The guy says, what's wrong? You got a fire on the bandstand. He says, well, the guys are freezing, man. I'm trying to feed them. We're cold. So he says, you broke my chair, Joe says. He got up and put his hands by. I said, how much was the chair? He was going to pay for the chair, not the bandstand. Yeah. He's crazy. But he had such great stories. I'm telling you, I've got some books in my story about him you don't believe. Just don't believe, man.
When was your first opportunity to record?
I think the first, professional record date I did was I was working at Child's Paramount Restaurant on Broadway and 43rd Street. It was downstairs from the Paramount Theater. Remember the Paramount Theater where Frank Sinatra had that whole thing with the Bobby Suckers? There was a restaurant downstairs called Child's Paramount. And I was working with Henry's band. And I got a call from a guy named Teddy Reeg, who was did you know that name?
Big producer, yeah.
Savoy Records, Guild Records, whatever, I don't know. And he called me, and my first record date was, you ready for this? My first record date. Kay Winding, or Kai as he was known later, Shelly Manne, Ed Safransky, and Alan, boy, I just threw a blank.
Sax player?
Yeah.
Alan Eager?
Alan Eager, yes. How'd you know that? That's right. Yeah, well, you should know that. And Alan Eager. And and what happened was the date became a fiasco. I hate to say this, but because of Alan Eager. Oh. Because he was like a negative personality, because we were like, guys would say, Kay would say, hey, what are we going to play? How about, and guys were making suggestions, like, why don't we play this, why don't we play that? Everything we said, Alan would say, no, man, tunes, don't play that. How about if we play it? So they tried to please him, say, all right, we'll play that. And nobody really wanted to play the tunes he wanted, but they were trying to appease him, And everybody wound up like this. Yeah. And I did a 3-hour interview for Phil Schaap on WKCR. And he played 2 of those records for me. I said, I thought there was only one called Ogamo. He said, no, there's another one. Wow. And I listened to it and I said, now I know why I don't have the other one. It's terrible. They were terrible. It's the beginning of the bebop thing, and everybody's ooh-ah, the flat of fifths and, all that. It was really terrible. I mean, you got great musicians like this, But it wasn't really good. Plus the fact that there was so much tension at that date. We went in at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and we played until about 12 noon the next day, and they only put that one record out, 2 sides or whatever it was, and we never got paid for the overtime. So I saw Teddy Reeg about 30 years later. I said, hey, Teddy, I never got any overtime for that date. He says, here's $10. He gave me $10 out of his pocket.
Well, it's interesting that a lot of recording at that time must have been pretty much off the cuff. You get the musicians together, and then you decide what you're going to play.
That's what it was. So everything mostly head arrangements. That's how they started those heads.
Right.
But the thing was, what was bad about it was that these promoters who knew nothing about music, but they just happened to know the musicians, they would get them in the studio, and they would say, just make something up. And they would make something up, and then somebody would come up with a name for the song, and the guys would never get any royalties for it. So now there's a couple of guys out, friends of mine now. They're, let me see, Dean Pratt and Don Sickler. Do you know those names? Don Sickler is a publisher.
I recognize, yes.
Oh, Don Sickler is a publisher, and he's got this music composers something. and they look out for royalties for musicians who've been getting screwed over the over the years, not getting their just desserts, you know. And they're beautiful because they look out for musicians to make sure they get what they're supposed to get. You see, so that's what happened. A lot of those little things where the guys made up a little head arrangement and nobody ever saw any money for it, except the guy who was running the record company. You know? So
what would a record date like that pay?
In those days, excuse me, in those days, for a 3-hour session was 41 and a quarter. 41.25.
You do have a pretty good memory.
I remember everything, I swear.
How about when you were first married and you were on the road? What kind of salary were you getting?
When I first, well, that's a long story about when I was, you see, when I left Bob Astor's band, before I left Bob Astor's band, we were working in Youngstown, Ohio at the Elms Ballroom. And we were there for 4 weeks. And there was a local theater where bands used to come in and play. And what's his name? Ray McKinley and Wilbur. His name is Wilbur Schrichten, but the trombone player. Oh, now the age is catching me. Ray McKinley and Will Bradley.
Okay.
Will Bradley McKinley. You know,
yeah.
18th and Chestnut, between 18th and 19th on whatever. You know, those celery stalks at midnight, all that stuff. Anyway, they came into town. They were thinking of splitting up. So, I talk about Will Bradley? Yeah, Will Bradley,
yeah.
Okay. So they come to the Elms Ballroom. No, Will Bradley came to the Elms Ballroom, and he heard us play, and he flipped out. And he took some of us on the side on one of the breaks, and he said, you know, Ray McKinley and I are breaking up. And he says, you guys are great, man, and I'm starting a new band. I'd love to have you guys with me. And we said, yeah, you know, because we were like young kids with his first band, you know. You get an offer from a guy like Will Bradley, he said, ready, I'm ready, you know. So what happened, we went back to New York. The band had some time off. We went back to New York, and I went to the rehearsal. And the piano player with Will Bradley's band was a fellow named Billy Maxted. He wrote all the arrangements. In fact, he wrote the arrangements for Chico Marx's band, see? So he wrote the arrangements for Bradley's band, and when Bradley wanted us to join his band, most of the guys in Astor's band went with him, including me. But the thing was that what's his name? Billy Maxted says, I'm not leaving. When I went to the rehearsal, he was playing piano. And he says, I'm not leaving the band until I get my money, because he owes me a lot of money for arrangements.
Oh.
See? He says, when I get my money, I'll call you, and you take my place. I said, okay. So in the meantime, I used to go to local 802. First, we'd go to local 802 to look for jobs, and then we would go to NOLA Studios, where all the musicians used to hang out. And NOLA Studios, did you ever hear of that name, NOLA Studios? It was on Broadway and 52nd Street, 51st Street, upstairs where now there's a hair, they teach girls how to make hair, stuff, whatever. And this place was huge. It was the whole floor from 51st to 52nd Street. They had about 12 different studios, rehearsal studios, where every band that came into town rehearsed at NOLA Studios. Bands would come into town, blah, 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 blah. And every room had a door with a mail slot in it. So we would go up there. If somebody was rehearsing, we'd look in the mail slot to see who was rehearsing. So, see? Try to sneak in and listen to the band, see? So I came up there one day, and there was the girl receptionist, Ella Jean, and I said, hey, Ella Jean, who's rehearsing today? She says, oh, no, I heard this music as I got out of the elevator. So I have a big band coming from that room. And I said, who's in that room? The band sounds great. She says, Chico Marx. I said, the Marx Brothers? She said, no, not the Marx Brothers, just Chico, the piano player. I said, oh, that's great. So I went over to the door to peek in the door to see what I could see, you know. Mm-hmm. And as I went to open the slot, the door opened and somebody walked out and I snuck in. So to close the door slightly, I closed it quietly, and as I'm standing there, somebody in the band says, hey, Benny, there he is now. And the whole band is looking at me. And there's nobody in the room but the orchestra and me. So I gave it the old classic, you know, who me? Who me? So this guy comes over to me, he says, hey, are you Marty Napoleon? I said, yeah, how'd you know that? He says, we called your house. Your wife said you went to the Union. I said, yeah, I was at the union. I just came over here to see who was rehearsing. So he said, I said, who are you? He says, I'm Ben Pollock. I'm the manager of the Chico Marx band. He says, would you like to try out for the band? I said, what? Because he called Billy Maxted. Benny, because the piano player gave us notice. Benny called Billy Maxted. Maxted said, call this kid, because he had my number. He said, call him. So he calls my house, and my wife said he went to the union.
And then you walk in the door.
And I walked in the door.
It's really weird.
I'm telling you, it's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
I mean, so he says, would you like to try out? Now, I just left Bob Astor's band where I couldn't read this many notes. You know, I didn't know how to read music. So I went over, he says, do you want to try out? I said, yeah. I couldn't remember. Everything was a blur. I didn't remember seeing guys sitting in the band, nothing. All I saw was a piano and music when they put the music out and had real chords written out.
Oof.
It didn't have...
Didn't know symbols?
Symbols. Had real chord charts, like charts with chords.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I sat down, I just blacked out. I looked at that and I said, forget it. You know, it's not going to happen. But since I had such a good ear from the time I was like 6 years old or whatever, or from birth, the band started to play, and I played along with them. Now, I found out later, first Benny comes over to me after I played a few numbers with the band. He says, okay, kid, you got the job. And I'm saying, why would this guy hire me? I mean, I could hardly play. I couldn't read. I didn't know anything. So he says, you got the job. You get $75 a week, and we leave Monday for Philadelphia. So I called my wife, and I said, honey, quit your job. We're going on the road. She said, get out of here. What are you talking about? So I told her what happened. She said, I don't believe it. What are you talking about? You know why she was incredulous? Because I had spoken to my father when I left Bob Astor's band. I said, Pop, I'm married. I'm going to have some kids. I can't read. I don't know. I'm not too good at piano, but I got to support my wife. He says, don't worry. I know somebody at Wheeler Shipyard.
Oh.
I'll get you a letter of introduction. And I carried that letter of introduction for 2 weeks in my pocket. When I went to the union, I had that letter in my pocket. I was going to go to the shipyards, find out, get a job, you know. So when I called my wife, I said, guess what? Quit your job. She was making $40 a week as a dressmaker. She said, I am not quitting my job. You're crazy. I said, no, honey, we're going on the road, and no wife of mine is going to work.
Oh.
I said, I'm going to support the family now. She said, why? What are you going to get? I said, $75 a week. She almost died. I said, hello? You know?
That was good.
75.
This was
kidding?
1942.
People were making $20 a week, $30. So I went on the road and I took my wife with me. She quit her job. She came on the road with me, and the rest is history. Wow. 6 months later, we were in Niagara Falls with Buffalo. We're playing the theater there, and Chuck and I, we played a split week, which means when you played a theater date, you played 7 days. When you did a split week, you did 3 days in one and 3 days in another, and you had 1 day off because Sundays were like blue law days, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So we had a day off, a Sunday off. So Chuck Max and his wife, my wife and I, we rented a car, went to Niagara Falls. I said, didn't I tell you I'd take you to Niagara Falls for your honeymoon?
There you go.
So it was great. I loved it. It was beautiful. It was beautiful.
My goodness. And then you went on to Lee Castle and Charlie Barnet.
Charlie Barnet.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a story. Charlie Barnet's band. I was reading Downbeat magazine. Have you heard, you got your own list, or you watching?
I got my own list here.
Do you know about all these things? Where'd you? Oh, you must have gotten that from what?
I did some research.
Leonard Feather. Huh?
Yeah, and Grove Dictionary.
Grove Dictionary, right? Okay. Anyway, so the Charlie Barnet thing was like I was sitting at home. I had just left, I don't know, Teddy Powell's band or Lee Castle's band. Teddy Powell's band, I think. Or Teddy Powell's band. That's another story. That Teddy Powell was weird. Because Teddy Powell's band, we had Charlie Ventura on the band, who was magnificent. And Teddy loved him, and he used to have arrangements written for Charlie that had, Charlie would play, he would feature him, you know, he played the introduction, featured throughout the whole thing, and blah, 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 blah. And then and then he got a call from Gene Krupa, was starting another band, so he called Charlie. He says, Charlie, I'm starting a symphonic orchestra. He says, you got it, you know. So he gave his notice to Teddy. In fact, Charlie says to me, I got a call from Gene, and he needs a piano player. And I told him about you. He says, see if he wants to come with the band. And I said, oh, I'd love to, but my brother Teddy's in New York. I don't think he's working, and I've got a job.
Oh,
So
yeah.
he says, yeah, you would do that for your brother? I said, hey, he's my brother, man. I got a job with Teddy Powell, you know, so call, you know, my brother. And he called my brother, and he was available, and he took the
Oh,
job. He
that's
went with
great.
Gene. So now Teddy takes the job with Gene, and I'm with Powell's band. And, then when Charlie gave his notice, we're doing a date in a ballroom someplace in Milwaukee, someplace. Well, it doesn't matter. St. Louis, Missouri. That's where I remember everything. And Charlie's doing his solo up front, and Teddy used to walk back and forth while he was playing his solo. And some kid says, "Hey, Teddy, man, he's fantastic." And Teddy says, "I'm listening to him. He's standing by the pianos." He says, "You think he's great? Wait until you hear the guy I got coming in, Teddy Nash." I said, first he's great, then he's not that good because he gave us notice, you know. So, well, that's the kind of guy he was. So now I gave my notice because he was getting on my nerves for some reason, I forget. So I look at my itinerary. I gave a 2-week notice, and on the 14th day of my notice, the 13th day of my notice, we have a day off in New York City, and the 14th day of my notice is in Toronto, Canada.
Oh.
Now, when you give your notice to a band on the road and you quit, you have to pay your way home. If he fires you, he pays your transportation home. So I went to him. I said, "Hey, Teddy, you know, I noticed on the 13th day we have a day off in New York City. Why don't you get a piano player to start in Toronto?" He said, "Oh no, you gave a 2-week notice, and your date ends up." I said, I got to get away from this band. You know?
Wow.
So I quit the band. So anyway, one little thing about Teddy Powell and Chico Marx was that Chico Marx was a fantastic man. He wouldn't go to dinner alone. He would always take a group of guys from the band with him. He'd love to eat with a group of people. And he always paid. I mean, I saved a lot of money that way, you know. So when I went with Teddy Powell's band, the first night on the job, after the job, guys went to get some hamburgers and things, you know. And when the waitress came with the check, he says, "I'll take it." So he took the check, and then he says, "You owe me 60 cents. I said, "Hey, Teddy, that ain't the way it's supposed to go."
That's not what I'm used to.
That's not what I... So anyway, with Charlie Barnet, I'm reading a Downbeat magazine, and they've got a review of Charlie Barnet's band in California, someplace. He was playing the Palladium or someplace. And I read the name of the guys in the band. It's like Barney Kessel and all these different people, guys that I know. And I said to my wife, "Gee, I'd like to play with that band, you know." And the next day, I get a call from a guy named... I get a call from Jimmy Lamar, who was a saxophone player. But he didn't go with the band, but Charlie had contacted him to get some guys for the Strand Theater in New York. It was going to be there for 8 weeks, 8 or 9 weeks of that. "Marty, yeah, Jimmy Lamar. Hey, Jimmy, how are you?" He said, "Listen, would you like to work with Charlie Barnet's band?" I said, "Get out of here. Give me that again. For real?"
Yeah.
He said, "Yeah, why?" I said, "No, it's too long a story." "Okay, you got it. Where is he going?" He said, "Strand Theater." I said, "Man."
Wow.
Boom. I went to the Strand Theater, 8 weeks. Now we're at the Strand. Gene Krupa goes into the Capitol Theater around the corner with his band, and my brother's with the band. And we're running between theaters like to see each other between shows. You know, it's great. I mean, it's just a...
What great times, huh?
Oh, it's a fabulous life, man. I love it. It's just...
Can you put this in perspective for me a little bit? The music that you were playing at that time.
Yeah.
What was the average age of the audience that would come to see
The
this?
audience, I'd say anywhere from 18 to 25, 30, somewhere around there. They were young kids. You know, this is something that you mentioned. Funny you mentioned that because I keep thinking about the fact that the music that we loved then, was the big band was like jazz tinged, right? Everything was like a jazz flavored. Now, nowadays, they've got these 18-year-old kids are listening to rap and whatever other stuff they're listening to. And I say, what happened to these kids when we were 18 that when they heard a Glenn Miller band or a Charlie Barnet or a Count Basie or a Duke Ellington, they went crazy? Don't these kids have the same kind of feeling that we did in those days?
That was the popular music of the day, what you were playing.
But that's beside the point. The point is, even today, you listen to a Glenn Miller arrangement, and the music is so melodic and so beautiful. I mean, I remember even when Buddy DeFranco was fronting the Glenn Miller band, a friend of mine called me, says, "Marty, would you like to go see the Glenn Miller band?" I said, "Where?" I said, "He's dead." He said, "No, but Buddy DeFranco's got the band. They're going to be at the St. Regis Roof." I said, "I'd love to." He says, "All right, you're my guest." And we went up there, and I swear to you, the band, I mean, the kids in the band were like 18, 19 years old, young kids, because he couldn't afford to get older guys.
Yeah.
When the band started to play the theme, I had a lump in my throat, and I got tears in my eyes. Because I said, I don't care how you feel about the band. The music was so beautiful, it's so romantic and so melodic, and I don't understand these kids today. Don't they hear a melody? I mean, can't they hear something when it makes sense? Does that...
Well, I have a small theory about that.
What?
And I think that the parts of the music that get the emphasis has changed a lot. And you mentioned there that the melodic end of it, that's what you heard. As soon as you heard that theme song, you heard the melodic end of it. But I think starting in the 50s and so forth, it's switched to the rhythmic end of it a lot more. And when you say rap, that's almost total
It's not even music.
Rhythm. It's almost
It's
total
not music.
Well, to the kids'
To their ears, they
ears,
think it's
it
music.
is,
They
but
call it
it's
music.
almost totally rhythmic, and also even the way they make the records now, the rhythm is so much out there farther than any melody that might even be there.
Well, maybe I'm prejudiced. I can't fathom listening to something when it doesn't have a melodic line, if they're just talking it. I mean, that's like Phil Harris talking 16 tons. Remember that song?
Sure.
Was it? 16 tons. Or somebody doing, or Rex Harrison doing My Fair Lady.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he did a great job, but he wasn't singing the song. You know, I want to hear Bobby Darin, you know.
Yeah.
Who is my favorite singer.
A quick question about the union. It seemed like they had a fairly together system about you just don't walk out on a band with the business of having to give 2 weeks.
Yes.
Let's suppose you walked out on a band.
Yeah.
What was the
criteria?
What could happen to you?
Oh, you could get fined.
But would you lose your union card or something like that?
I don't know. It's never happened to me. And I don't know anybody that it's ever happened to. But, I mean, if you're working, you mean like, say, for instance, you're traveling on the road with a band?
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's a matter of personal thing between the leader and whoever is walking out on the band.
Yeah.
Maybe the band leader will say, "Good riddance." I wanted to get rid of him anyway. So the guy quit, good riddance. See? Or he might say, "Oh, you can't do that to me." Like Teddy Powell said, "No, you gave a 2-week notice, which means you got to go 14 days. And the 13th day was a day off. You got to go. I had to go to Toronto, and I was making like, I don't know, was I making $130 a week or something like that? And I had to pay my own car fare back from Toronto, which was, I don't know how much it was, $10, $20, I don't know. But it fell in my, hurt me in the pocket, see?
Right.
And I said, why couldn't he say, I'll get a piano player in New York? He was in New York. He could have made a phone call to his agent or somebody who was booking the band and say, get me a piano player in New York and have him meet us up in Toronto. Boom.
Yeah.
Simple. There were so many guys in those days. My God, everybody was there, you know?
Oh, he was probably in a bad mood because Charlie was leaving.
Charlie was leaving.
I'll take it out on you.
I think Charlie did. I had already left, I think. But that band was great. We had some marvelous players. We had a guy named Boots Mazzulli, and Boots was my roommate, and he would say to me, he had to write an arrangement a week for the band, and he'd say, well, what do you want me to write? He didn't know what to, you know. I say, why don't you do Perdido? Good, I'll put a solo in there for you. So, of course, he was beautiful. We had Pete Condoli with the band, Milt Bernhardt, 2 brothers, Brooks Brothers, right?
Yeah.
Lead trumpet and lead trombone. They were fantastic. Larry Brooks, and I forget the trumpet player's name. The guys were great. And who else we have? Charlie Ventura. We had some good guys. All I know is good men. And we used to go up to Boston a lot and play the Raymore Playmore Ballroom. And who am I talking about? Teddy Powell's band?
I think you were.
Teddy Powell's band. Oh, Teddy Powell's band. Forgive me, it's my age. But we used to play the Raymore Playmore Ballroom in Boston, and in those days, every band had to do a waltz set, you know, play a waltz occasionally. And we would play the waltzes, and Charlie would say A flat, and he'd play do 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 do. He would play Mersey Dotes as a waltz, and it was great. It was great. Charlie was great, and the kids, they realized that Teddy Powell didn't have any talent, and they used to come to us and say, you know, this is one of the best bands we've ever heard of in this ballroom. Can't you get rid of that guy up front?
Yeah.
We said, no, he's the leader. He put us together.
That wasn't the only band that was the case
well,
with,
of
was
course.
it? Right?
I always used to say, if a guy doesn't have talent, he books the men, he leads the band. You know, that's except for guys like Benny Goodman and guys Tommy Dorsey and people like that. You know.
Yeah. When we look back on those times now, the end of World War II, and
Right.
we're able to say, okay, well, that was the demise of the big band. Did you guys in the bands get a sense of what was happening at the time
With the war?
Well, when did the business start to go downhill or to change for you guys that were playing?
Well,
and
I'll
on the
tell you the
road?
truth. In my youth, I wasn't very intelligent. All I had in my mind was playing the piano. I didn't think politically. I didn't think musically. Musically actually, just for the band that I was playing with.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what was going on in the world, actually. I wasn't aware of all of those things. All I knew is I had to support a wife and a kid, and this is what basically took up time in my head. But funny you should say the end of the war. I just looked at my book the other night, and I noticed on 1945, when the war ended, I was playing with Charlie Barnett's band. We were playing in someplace out on Midwest in an airplane hangar. I just read that the other day. Isn't that incredible? I said, look at where I was with Charlie's band when the war ended. And we played a victory dance that night. It was great.
Neat.
But speaking about the war, with Charlie Barnett's band, when we left New York, when we finished at the Strand Theater in New York, I had to make a decision because my daughter was just a year and a half old. And the manager said, you know, we're going to go to California. I said, gee, I don't know if I want to make that trip. I got a wife and a little kid. He says, well, you know, every time we go to California, Charlie likes to sit down for about a year or more. I said, that sounds good, because he lived in Sherman Oaks, California. And when he got back to California, he liked to sit there a while. You know, in other words, he was on the road, then he comes home and he sits. Yeah. He goes on the road, then he comes home and sits. So I said to my wife, and we had to make a decision. You know, we were saying, what should we do? We were like 1942. I was like 21, 23 years old, you know. And we said, well, let's go, you know. So we decided to go with the band. It was rough. Man, I'm telling you, I don't know how. When my wife and I think back, we say, how did we do it? It had to be because we were so young and stupid. Because if we had any brains, we would have said, well, you're crazy. I'm not going to carry my daughter on a bus on one-nighters.
Well, time passed, you eventually got to work with your uncle.
Yes, my Uncle Phil.
Yeah, and
That's a funny story, too, because he had really a great Dixieland band, and I couldn't play Dixieland not one note. So my brother-in-law, Shorty Allen, is a piano player, and he's married to my sister, and the four of us and somebody else, I forget who was with us, we went to New York to see Some Like It Hot. You know that.
Yeah.
And when we came out of there, we said, let's go see Uncle Phil at Nick's. He was working at Nick's. So we go to see him at Nick's. Now, Phil, he knew that Shorty and I were like considered bebop piano players because we didn't know from Dixieland, you know.
Yeah.
So he felt so funny because he said, either one of you guys want to sit in? You know, hoping we'd say, no, we can't play that kind of music. So I said, Shorty, go ahead, why don't you play? See? So Shorty says, okay. So he went inside and played. And the next set, Phil said, now I got to ask my nephew, right? Marty, you want to sit in? I said, yeah, all right. Okay, so I sat. He says, what do you want to play? I said, Phil, I don't know your routines, your songs, you know, your repertoire. So pick a song. He says, how about Back Home Again in Indiana? I said, bing, I know that one. So we started playing Back Home Again in Indiana, and luckily he played it, boop, 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 not too fast. It was like slow, which means when it got to my solo, when I took a piano solo, just because I was in Rome, I figured, let me do this.
Sure.
And he turns around at me and he says, oh, yeah? Because I'm figuring, well, I got to make the guy happy anyway.
Yeah.
See, you know? So I'm going, and he turned around and he's slapping the piano like this. So when we finished the set, he comes over to me and says, Marty, come over here, I want to talk to you. I knew right away what he was going to say, see? And I was ready to say yes, because I wanted to learn how to play some Dixieland. Sure enough, he took me in the corner. He says, I didn't know you could play like that. I says, I don't. He said, well, I just heard you. I said, Phil, that was for you. Because I knew I didn't want you to say bebop piano player, see? So I said, I think I would like that. So I took the band. I took the job with the band. That's how I wound up with his band.
Memphis 5 was it called?
It was called the Memphis 5. It was a great band. But what funny thing is, we went up to Boston for 2 weeks, and we played at Mrs. Donahue's place. It was great. And he and I had a little falling out because he had Saul Yeager on clarinet, a young kid about 19 years old, Dick Brady on trombone, Tony Sparger on drums, who was fantastic. Did you ever hear that name?
No.
From the old New Orleans Rhythm Kings.
Oh.
Rhythm something. They were the New Orleans.
Oh, that Tony.
Tony Spargo.
Yeah.
His real name was Barbaro, but he changed it to Spargo because everybody couldn't say Spargo, they said Spargo. And Tony Spargo, he used to play the kazoo when he played a solo, and he had a big Chinese crash cymbal. Boy, he had a great time. He would go, and I used to jump off the stool. I said, this guy is great. I loved it. But anyway, what happened was, and there was a bass player. His name was Bob Carter. Actually, he had a long Hawaiian name, but he changed it to Carter because nobody could ever say his name. And he was blind. He had been temporarily blinded during the war. And I met him when he was working on 52nd Street with Charlie Ventura and Bill Harris. And they had a little group, and I got to meet him. We got to be good friends, and he'd say to me, every time I met him, he'd recognize my voice, saying, Marty, get me a gig, get me a gig. So when Phil called me, when I was going to rehearse with the band, he said, I need a bass player. So I called Bob. I said, hey, Bob, I got a gig for you. He says, get out of here. I says, yeah. He says, and guess what? He says, I got my sight back. He says, you're kidding. He says, yeah, it was a temporary thing. It was shock, like, you know? But he says, but there's still a little thing in the center of his eyes that had to clear up yet, see? So I said, beautiful, man. So I got him on the band. But he was like a real, you know? So I said, but you got to play 2/4. He says, I don't care. I'll play anything. You know? So anyway, he comes on the band. Now we're in Boston. We're playing. And the band was just fantastic. It was a great Dixieland band. But every time a trombone solo, clarinet solo, or piano solo, the guy's like, ding, 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 ding. So Phil says, Marty, I want to talk to you. We went outside. And we had a discussion on the sidewalk for about half an hour, man. He was saying, you know, he went into an oration, like a long one about, you know, I didn't make my name in music without, because the fact that there's jazz, Dixieland, and they love me because we play Dixieland, and you guys are playing 4/4 swing. And I said, Phil, we're not trying to disrespect you or anything. This is what we feel. We're young guys, and we like to play. I mean, we'll do what you want. We're playing for you. Don't we do what you... Yeah, but, you know, Baba, we went through a long thing, and I finally convinced him. I said, we love what you're doing. We love playing with the band. If it comes out that way, we can't help it. So what? How long does it last? A minute? A half a minute? He says, yeah, you're right. Okay, I don't care what you play, as long as we're swinging like it is. And it got me off the hook. See, it was great. And the band was just incredible. It was fantastic. So what happened was, while we were there for those 2 weeks, Mrs. Donahue was a beautiful lady. She invited us out to her house for dinner, and she said, do you guys like to golf? I said, I love to golf. So she says, you got any clubs? I said, no, I'm on the road with you. She says, if you go club, so Bob and I, he used to carry his clubs with him. We went golfing every day for 2 weeks. 8 o'clock in the morning. When we finished the engagement, I was paralyzed. I was using muscles I hadn't used. So we come back to New York, and my wife had to wash my face, put my pants on. I couldn't
No
move.
kidding.
I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. And now Phil says, he calls and says, we have to go and do 2 nights in Paris Island, North Carolina, at the marine place. Or the,
Oh.
you know, that Paris Island? It's a marine place where the Marines, very famous, North Carolina. And we drove down, and I drove with Bob in his car all the way like this in the car because I couldn't move. And he says, you know what, incidentally, he says, he's driving the car. And he said, and I'm hanging on because my back is killing me, right? He says, incidentally, the doctor says, even though I have my sight back, it could go off any minute. I said, thanks a lot, man. I said, you shouldn't tell me that while I'm in pain.
You 2 guys are in great shape there.
Oh, God.
Wow.
So, I mean, these are stories that, you
Yeah.
know, when I do a club date or something, and we sit in the back room,
Right.
and the guys want to know these stories, and they say, man, why don't you write a book? I said, I wrote a book. Nobody wants to publish it. I'm trying to get somebody to condense it because it's 7 million pages long, you
Right.
know.
Who were you listening to at the time? You considered yourself a bopper.
Yeah, well, I
Did
like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Did
finish
you
the book.
listen to like Bud Powell or?
Oh, sure.
You know.
Sure. I mean, in fact, when they'd ask me questions, guys come to review the bands that I was with. They'd ask the guys individually, "Who's your favorite pianist?"
Right.
And I say, "Well, I like Oscar Peterson and Errol Garner. Errol was my favorite, you know, because he was a friend of mine. He used to send me Christmas cards. And one day, my son found a Christmas card in the drawer. He said, "Hey, Dad." I said, "What?" He said, "Errol Garner." I said, "What?" He says, "He sent you a Christmas card." I said, "Yeah, I get one every year." He says, "Man."
Wow, you're legitimate all of a sudden.
I didn't know you were that famous. You know. I said, yeah, he's my friend, you know.
Yeah.
In fact, he made a record of a thing called That's My Kick. Did you ever hear it?
No.
He's got an introduction. He must have been stoned when he did it, because I don't know how he did that. It's like so erratic. I tried to notate it, and I went crazy. I couldn't do it. So I saw him on the street one day. I said, "Hey, Errol, please, I'm trying to write down that kick." You know, I said, "What did you do in that intro?" He said, "Man, how am I supposed to know?" You expect me to know that?
Well, sure. And if you had been able to write it down and give it to him to play it,
Oh, he couldn't
wouldn't
play
have
it
been able
anyway.
to
I
play it.
couldn't read, of course, I
Yeah.
know. But he was great. In fact, we did an album together. I digress. Go ahead, ask your question.
Well, I have to get to Louis Armstrong.
Go ahead, I know.
You know, and
They always do, yeah.
Yeah. I see he was lucky enough to get
Me
on
on
a
it.
no his
That's
name with you.
That's a black market album, you know.
Is it
it's
really?
from Milano.
Yeah.
And I had a friend of mine, I was working at Eddie Condon's on 54th Street one night, and I saw a friend of mine who was a distributor. I said, "Hey, you know, Joe Marini sent me this, the clarinet player, he sent me this. He said, I got an album of you and Louis and Tyree on the headlines." I said, "What do you mean?" He sent me the album. I said, "I can't believe this." You know why? It's a double album. See, it's got our pictures inside and everything.
Oh, great.
But the reason I think they picked Tyree and me was because he and I were the only guys in the band who did an encore. See, when we did concerts with Louis,
I see.
if you got an exceptionally big hand, he said, do another chorus, pops. You know, do an encore, do something else. You could either do the same thing over or play another song. So Tyree and I both got big enough hands that he would say, "Do another song." So they figured in Italy, in Milano, they said, these guys must be featured, they must be the big stars in the band because they're the only ones who did an extra chorus. That's the only way I can figure it out.
Wow.
You know? Why would they do that? You know? And that's a funny story about it. Was that after Charlie Barnet? No, after Charlie Barnet, I went with Gene Krupa's band.
Yeah, you replaced your
My
brother?
Teddy, yeah. That's a funny story, too, because I was working at Child's Paramount with Henry Jerome's band. And there was excuse me. And let me drink a little ginger ale, does it?
That'll do it.
And there was a club on 5th Avenue and 43rd Street called the 400 Club. And I was working with Henry at the 42nd Street and Broadway. And after the job, I went to see Krupa's band because I knew they were working at this club. See, and I went when I walked in, the band, I don't know whether they had just taken a break or they played the last number, something. But Joe Dale was was a manager of the band. And he was a drummer. Whenever Gene stood in front of the band, he would play the drums. Joe Dale. So he came to me. He says, "Hey Marty, would you like to sit in with the band?" You know, these things happen to you like you're taken aback. You know, I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." So I went. I played a set with the band. See, and when I got off, and Joe came to me and he says, "You know, Gene likes you very much. Would you like to join?" I said, "What are you kidding? My brother's with the band. I would never do that." He said, "No, he's on. He gave us notice. He was leaving the band." I said, "Well, I got to find him." And you know, I couldn't find my brother anywhere. I didn't know where it happened to. It wasn't. Maybe he got annoyed because I was sitting in. He figured if somebody's going to take his place, maybe some guy from left field would come in. Here's his own kid brother sitting up there. You know, I don't really know it. We never discussed it or anything. You know. So anyway, I took the band. I took the job with the band, and I went with the band. And why did I say that story? Because because you got to
yeah, we were talking about Krupa. This was 1945.
46, yeah. And so anyway, I went with the band, and what happened was I know it broke my brother's heart because he was with the band for some time, and I go with the band, and we went to California. We did 2 movies, a movie and a short. Now I know that broke his heart. What could I do? I didn't tell him to make a movie so I could be in it. So I know that he was very distressed about that.
Yeah.
I would have been too. You know, say, my God, it's like with me with Louis. I did the Glenn Miller story, but then when I left the band after traveling so much, we did 1 week. We came from Norway or something like that, and we went to Honolulu. Then we came back to Massachusetts, and then they were going to Japan. I said, I can't make it. I can't make it. I quit. I gave my notice. And I said to my wife, I'm disturbed with Joe Glazer because he knew they were going to make High Society, and he didn't say to me, well, why don't you hang in there because we're going to make... See? So they made High Society, and I don't want to look at that movie because I should have been on that movie, you know, because I gave my notice because we were doing so many big jumps, Europe, Hawaii, back and forth. I got so tired.
Traveling was
unbelievable.
Was harder.
I don't know how Louis did it. He
he
loved it.
Yeah, he never stopped.
He just loved it. He loved being on the road more than he did living at home. He carried everything with him. Anything he owned he had 27 bags with him on the road. Yeah, we got off a plane once. We were waiting for a bus to take us to Carolina someplace, and they had all. In fact, they stole my bag. I had a big, you know, what do you call it?
Attaché case. Or
no,
something?
my big.
Oh, duffel bag.
No, my big clothes. You know, my luggage. My big
Really?
luggage. I can't. Samsonite. I had a big
Right.
Samsonite, and it was on the sidewalk with 1,000 pieces of luggage. So some guy came and says, I think it might have been a red cap or something. Man, how many guys in your band? We said, 6 guys. He said, 4,000 pieces of luggage. We said, well, 27 of Louis. He said, 27? He carried everything on the road, everything on the road on with him. You know. And then when we got to where I think we went to Georgia, and when we got there, my bag wasn't there, and I lost my bag. And somebody just picked it up. They saw a million bags. It's easy, right? Just grab one and walk away.
Yeah.
That's what they did. So get back to where were we with the Krupa?
Well,
with Louis.
Yeah, with Louis. And
yeah, okay.
He was pretty much controlled or under the thumb of Joe Glazer. Is that right? Or was he his own man?
No, he was his own man.
Yeah.
But because he liked, Louis used to say, I've heard him say on many occasions, especially if he had a couple of beers, you know, he would say, it's only 1, 2, 3 things in my life that matter to me. My horn, Joe Glazer, and Lucille. And not necessarily in that order, you know. I don't remember how he said it, but those are the 3 things he thought about. That's what he cared about. Everything else, forget about it. I don't care. But a lot of people would say, well, you know, Louis made Joe Glazer rich. And I say, yeah, well, Joe Glazer made Louis rich too, you know, because Joe Glazer would make some kind of deals with promoters. He'd say, you want Louis? You got to book Red Norvo, or you got to take so-and-so. You know, he would make deals for different people. You know, he was a sharp, smart promoter.
So some of the other musicians profited from that association too.
How do you mean?
Well, Red Norva was getting more work.
Oh, well,
because
no,
of
I don't
Louis
mean
Armstrong.
especially Red Norva. I just
Yeah.
thought he came into
See,
mind because he's the
right.
reason why I went with Louis.
Oh,
Not especially, but when Joe Glazer called me, first time he called me to go with Louis, it's a funny story because he said, Marty, it's Joe Glazer. Did you work with Phil Napoleon's Memphis 5? I said, yeah, why? He said, you played Dixieland? I said, I guess so. You know, if I worked with Phil's band, I guess I. He said, well, you want to go with Louis Armstrong? And I said, no. He said, did you hear what I said? I said, yeah, Louis Armstrong. He says, you don't want to go with Louis? I said, no. I said, oh, because of the fact that I had just left the group. No, I didn't leave the group. It broke up. I was with a quartet just before I went with Louis. I worked with Phil Napoleon. Then I went with a group called the Big Four.
oh,
And we went to Chicago for 2 weeks, and we stayed 4 months. And my wife was up there. She said, I'm going to leave you. I said, no, well, the band, you know. Finally, what happened was the group broke up, and we came back to New York. And that's when Joe Glazer called me. And I said, no, I can't, Mr. Glazer. He said, why? I said, well, you know, you booked the Big Four. He was our agent, manager, and agent. He was our
Oh.
he was our agent.
yeah.
Ginger ale. And I said, and you know, we were in Chicago for so long, my wife couldn't make it anymore. So I promised my wife, when the group broke up, I said, no more road, honey. I made a vow to my wife, no more road. Because she says, it's either me or the road. I said, I prefer you, so I'm home. So he says, all right, look, why don't you do this? Why don't you come up to see me, talk to me, and we'll see what happens. I said, okay. So I said, honey, I got to go up and talk to him because I know Glazer for many years, and he's been nice to me. He's a nice guy, blah, 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 blah. You never know. Maybe he'll get me a job someplace else to do whatever. So I went up to see him, and Red Norva was waiting to see him. He said, what are you doing, Martin? I said, well, I'm waiting. Glazer called me, wanted me to go with Louis' band. He said, great. I said, yeah, but I don't want to go. He said, what do you mean? He said, like, what do you mean, you don't want to go with Louis? I said, I told him what happened. I said, I was with the Big Four, you know. We went to Chicago for 2 weeks. We stayed 4 months, and my wife was ready to jump off a bridge, and so was I. I mean, I was away so long. So I made a promise to her. I said, okay, that's it. I'm not going on the road anymore. So he says, are you crazy? He said, look what happened with Earl Hines. Earl had a big name, but not as big as Louis. But when he went with Louis, they were equal. Yeah. And he was getting like equal publicity and stuff, even though Louis was the boss. But Earl, he got exposure. He says he got a lot of exposure. And then after a while, he split and got his own group. Now he's doing very well. He's going all over the world with his own group. And I'm listening to him like a jerk. I listened to him. Not like a jerk, because I went in, and by the time I went inside, Glazer said, ba, 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 and I says, well, okay. What am I saying?
Ooh, that must have been a long trip home.
Oh, man. Well, of course, I called my wife and said, honey, guess what? She said, you're kidding. She's been through, I tell you, she's gone through a lot with me, really. She's been through a lot.
You've got the road in your blood, I guess.
No, not really. I said, like, you know what I always say? Like, I remember once when I was very disappointed about playing club dates, you know, like weddings and things like that, bar mitzvahs, and I said, I think I'm going to give it up and just, she said, you're going to quit the music business? I said, no, she says, I thought you liked music. I said, honey, I love music. I hate the music business. There's a difference.
Well said.
Because playing music, this is what happens with a lot of musicians. That's why these two guys formed this thing, so they can get musicians their royalties, because guys, they love to play. Look how many times you go to a jam session, and the boss of the club loves it because he's paying for a trio, and he's got 18 guys on the bandstand. Now, I played a million places like that, where I used to have a trio, guys coming from all over the place just sitting on the band. Yeah, hey, trombone. A guy brought his vibraphone, set him up on the front of the bandstand. One guy had a baritone. He put his case on the table and chair in the dining room. I said, man, don't do that. Put it on the bandstand. He says, where? Where am I going to put it, you know? But the bosses, of course, they love that, you know, because they had all these free musicians playing. You know, it's great. So anyway, but my wife has taken a lot from me over the years. But like I say, I don't mind. I didn't mind the traveling. I don't like the road. I guess it's what it is. You know, it's the buses and falling asleep in the bus. That's how I started wearing glasses. I never wore glasses because the guys in the bus would be sleeping, and I have the little light on with a book, and the thing going up and down like that. And I said, man, after a while, I said, I can't see the words anymore. You know? So I lost my sight on the buses just reading.
You got to go overseas with Louis then?
Quite a bit, yeah.
Or in other groups too?
Well, the other group was with Peanuts Hucko.
Is there certain places that you've played that were particularly memorable overseas?
Mostly all of the places, because especially, like I say, I wrote everything down. So I remember every place. One of the most exhilarating experiences was when we got to Switzerland. First time I played in Switzerland. First time I went to Europe with Louis was in October of 1952. 52 or 53? I think it might have been 53. What? You don't remember? What does it say there?
It says 52, 53 the first time around.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, first place...
Sweden, Denmark.
Sweden, first place was Eskilstuna, Sweden. And we got into this town, and the place was closed. Everything, there wasn't a thing in town. I met a guy, and he could speak English. He spoke to me. He said, "You Louis Armstrong?" I said, "Yeah." Why? I said, "Hey, where is everybody?" He says, "What do you mean?" I said, "I don't see anybody in the streets. Nobody walking. The shops are closed." He said, "Louis Armstrong's here." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "They closed the whole town. They were getting prepared to go see Louis at the concert."
Wow.
I swear to God, man. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "What do you mean? Louis Armstrong's here." I said, "Oh." I said, "Okay." Okay. So anyway, with Sweden, then we went to Denmark, then we were here and there. I traveled a lot, but it was so rough, I'm telling you, because we were doing not only like we'd play one country here today and then go to the next country, we would play 2 shows, one in the afternoon and one in the evening, and sometimes the second one in the evening would be in a different country. I mean, how rough that is. We got to Germany, and this promoter she was money hungry. She was trying to get as much out of Louis as she could, and we got to a town, I forget where it was, it might have been Munich, and we checked into the hotel, and we were so tired because we had just gotten off a bus about 13 hours or so, and we checked in about 7:30 or 7:45, and 8:15, she was downstairs, "Let's go. The concert's at 8:30. We had to get back on the bus. And we just had time to put your bags down, wash your face, shave, and run downstairs. So I went past the dining room, and Arvell Shaw was sitting in the dining room. I said, "Hey, you eating? How can you eat?" He says, "Man, I got to get something. I'm starving." She said, "I'm just having some soup." I said, "I'm going to do that too." So I sat down with him. I ordered some soup. So now, here comes Louis walking past the dining room. We were sitting right by the door entrance. He said, "Hey, man, what you guys doing?" We said, "Got to have something." Like, "Yeah, I'm going to have some too." So he sat down. Next thing you know, the whole band was sitting at our table. And she came, she was fuming. She was ranting and screaming, and Louis told her all kinds of words, man.
Yeah.
He said, "Get that." And man, we got to eat something. We're starving, man. We're hungry. We'll do your concert, so we'll run over. Well, you know how they are. Concert says 8:30. We got to start at 8:30. You know? It was crazy. So we all ate. We said, "Get lost." And the next thing you know, a guy said, "I'll have a steak. I'll give you a sandwich." And Louis said, "Bring me some of this." So we said, "That's it, man. Get lost. You know, get out." She was crazy, man. But it was. I tell you, I don't know how Louis did it. You know how he did it? He loved it. He loved it. Just. Well, of course, his biggest thrill was being in front of the people, because he would always say, "Those people came to see me, and I'm going to do the best that I can do," which is very admirable, right?
Did you ever have any problems with the fact that it was a integrated band racially?
I'm sure there was, but I'm trying to think of when it was. In fact, I told this, you know Ken Burns is doing a thing, right? And they came to my house 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, 2 years ago. No, 96, 97, 98, 96, I think it was.
Wow.
And they came in with a crew of 10 people. My basement is about as big as they had things all over the place. And they interviewed me, and I told this story about, we were in Texas, and we were playing at a place called Seven Hills or something, Seven something. And we had taken a break, and I went outside to get some fresh air. So it was very hot in the room, even though there was air conditioning. You know, it gets hot with it. So I went outside, and while I was sitting like this getting some sun, it got shady, it got dark, and I opened my eyes, and I saw about 4 big Texas kids with the big necks like this, you know. They said, "Hey, man." I said, "Yeah." They said, "How come you playing with a nigger band?" I said, "What?" They said, "You heard me." One guy was talking to me. I said, "You heard me." I said, "What the hell are you talking about, man?" I said, "You know what that is? That's Louis Armstrong." "So what?" I said, "What do you mean, so what? Did you pay to come in to see him?" Guy says, "Yeah." I said, "How much did you pay?" He said, "I forget, $10. I said, "I'm getting paid to work with him. You're a bigger jerk than I am, aren't you?" And just as I said that, Cozy was coming out to get some, call me or something, and he heard me say that. He says, "Marty, telephone." So he came to grab me, and he pulled me in.
Yeah.
He says, "Are you crazy?" I said, "What?" He said, "Did you see the size of those guys?" I said, "Yeah, but did you hear what they said? I mean, come on, Cozy." And the only other thing I saw was, excuse me, a couple of incidences. One was we were down south someplace, well, 3 or 4 incidences. Now, I had never worked with a mixed band before. It was always white bands. And in fact, when I joined Louis, it was 3 and 3, 3 white guys, 3 black guys, and the girl. And we were doing one night of someplace, I forget, Texas, someplace down south. And I had never played the South before, strangely enough, with all the bands I'd been with. Now here I am with a mixed band, and we're down south, right? So we walked into it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, and we stopped for breakfast at a restaurant. And we walked in, and there were 2 or 3 guys behind the counter, and they disappeared into the kitchen. So we sat down, and the Frenchie was the manager. He says, "All right, guys, let's leave." I said, "Wait a minute, we just came in." I was so naive, man. I didn't know. He said, "Let's leave, let's leave." I said, "Where are we going? We didn't eat." And he said, "Marty, let's leave." I said to somebody, I forget, a Cozy or somebody, "What the hell happened?" He says, come on, Marty. What? Did you see the guys disappear?" I said, "Oh, yeah, there were guys behind the counter. They just, when we walked in, they walked, you know." So I said, "Oh," that was my first inkling that what was happening. Then we stopped at a place at a gas station that had restrooms, and we went to the restrooms, and it said blacks and whites, you know, and there was like a water fountain. So I went to get some water, and Velma came. I said, "Velma, the water's so cold, it's delicious." She says, "You know I can't drink that." I said, "Get out of here." I said, "You get over this." Velma was about 300 pounds.
Yeah.
And I was this skinny when I joined the band. I said, "Go ahead, I'll cover you." She said, she was going to punch me. She said, "Get out of here, jerk." I said, "Don't worry, Velma, I got you covered." So, and let me see, there was another place that I can't, oh, I know one. We were playing in Austin, Texas at a ballroom. And this is one thing that really surprised me, because we had a guy that used to sell the programs in front of the theater when we were doing concert. You know, the big programs that they sell with all the big pictures and everything. So we're going by bus, and the bus breaks down about 20 or 30 miles outside of town. You okay?
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, okay.
So the bus broke down, and so the guy calls for another bus to replace. He couldn't fix it. So we're waiting, and now it's like 5, 6 o'clock, and guys are getting hungry. So the manager was the white guy, Frenchie. Excuse me. That's the ginger ale.
Yeah.
It's human, you know. It's real. Anyway, so we said, we just passed the diner about 100 feet back there. So the guy that sold the programs, Frenchie and myself, we went there to get some food. We sat at the counter, we ate, and then we took out 5 or 6, or I don't know, for the rest of the guys. I said, "What do you want?" I took an order. Like when you work in an office in New York, who wants coffee? Who had the cheeseburger? So we took out some blue plate specials, and we walked them back to the bus, and the guys ate in the bus. See, Now the other bus comes, picks us up there, change buses, we get in the other bus, we get to this ballroom, and so the bus pulls up in front of the ballroom, so we go in the front entrance, and the bandstand is way at the end of the dance floor. So we walked in and there was like, naturally no music or anything, so everybody's sitting down at the tables, dance floor is empty. We walked right across the dance floor, and the whole room got up, standing applause. Because Louis is walking,
Wow.
he's coming in.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't believe this, man. This is weird, man. I can't believe this. This is happening here, These are the things that, first time I ever witnessed something like that in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, prior to that, I had always been with white bands, and I never experienced anything like that.
Right.
But the funny thing happened once we were in Florida, and we were living in Miami, and we had to do a one-nighter in West Palm Beach or something like that, not too far away. So I had a friend of mine who had a band down there, and I had dinner with he and his wife and some friends of theirs. So his wife says to me, you're doing a concert tomorrow night at West Palm Beach. Can we come with you? I said, gee, I don't know. I'll have to ask my manager. I don't know what kind of situation it is. So I called Frenchie. I said, Frenchie, I got some friends. They would like to come to the concert. He says, how many people? I said, how many you want to go? So just his wife and her girlfriend said, we'd like to go with you. I says, okay. In fact, she says, we'll drive you down there because I know exactly where the place is. It was called something Palace, but you should have seen the place. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was weird, man. So anyway, they drove me down there. And when we got in the place, it was like a funky, like a social club, where they have dances like with the teenagers.
Yeah.
Social, but run down, broken down kind of place. And I looked for the bandstand. It was across the room, and it was about 9 feet in the air. Like there's a balcony, a bandstand about 9 feet up, 8 or 9 feet up on the with a railing. I don't even know if it had a railing. With an upright piano that was on a slant because the floor slanted this way towards the thing.
Oh, jeez.
It was weird. So I went up on the bandstand, and Pop says to me, you better get those two girls and bring them up here, Pops, because it could get rough.
Wow.
It could get rough. So I said, okay. They were both blondes, too. So I said, hey, girls, up here. So they went up, they come up, and they sat on the bandstand all night with us. So
Wow.
that's, little vignettes.
Well, you've got an education.
Yeah, that was it. That's when I learned what was happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you want to show us a few items from your book?
Anybody on the other bands you want to talk to, or are we running out of time?
Well, I know you've played, you did the Metropole.
Oh, boy, that was great. I loved it.
Yeah?
Yeah. Guys used to say to me, why do you work on that dump? I said, what do you mean dump? Do you know what I did at the Metropole? I worked there well, of course, I worked with my own groups. I worked with other people. But I was there for about 10 years with different people. And for approximately 2.5 years, I worked with Charlie Shavers, Coleman Hawkins, Mickey Sheen, and the bass players fluctuated, either Arvell Shaw or Benny Moten, or different bass players. But with Charlie Shavers and Coleman Hawkins, and when Coleman took off, Roy Eldridge would play, and one night Charlie took off, he sent in Dizzy Gillespie. It was fantastic, man. I loved it. It was just great. And it was just a magnificent, not only that, at that particular time, all the country clubs around the New York metropolitan area would have, like some Saturday night, they would say, why don't we have a Dixieland thing?
Yeah.
Who can we get? Who's at the Metropole?
Ah.
I got calls all the time because I would work, like for instance, there was a guy, Tony Cabot was a society band leader. First he worked with Maya Davis, and then he split and he got his own office, and he used to use me all the time. I worked for Tony for 30 years. But anyway, he would call me, and I would work with his band on the day to do, I would play the jobs because I knew all those things. See? Now, a lot of jazz guys don't. They know their jazz tunes, and that's it. So they'd say, get Marty, because now, and then they would say, okay, but we want you to bring a couple of guys, because during the night we're going to bring you out and let you play some Dixieland things. So I brought like Ruby Braff and Bud Freeman and people like that. So Tony, during the night, would say, now we're going to have Marty Napoleon's going to bring some guys out, and we would get on the floor and do a little. People went crazy. So Now another country club says, hey, why don't we have a New Orleans type of dance? Gets here, Marty. I did loads of those things. Not only that, I did about 10 or 12 weeks on the Art Forge Channel 13 show, which was coming from Newark, and the only reason they called was because we were at the Metropole. They got most of their guys from the Metropole. See? Now, Art Ford, he liked, the kind of music he liked was like Zooty Singleton, George Wetling, what they called moldy fig kind of music. You know what that is?
Yeah.
You know, traditional jazz, the old, you know, Zooty with the rum, and all that kind of stuff. And now this girl that was hiring the musicians for the thing, she didn't know this much about who to hire. She didn't know any musicians at all. So when she met me, she would talk to me and say, well, who should I get? I said, well, man, there's so many guys around. Come on, man. There's blah, blah, blah. So I would give her a list of names, and it went along pretty good until one time when he had already hired Buster Bailey on clarinet, and I had recommended guys like Sammy Most, Tony Scott, Jerry Mulligan, Morgana King. These are like different era, you know. These are not like old-fashioned Dixieland. So now we're doing a show, and there's Buster Bailey and Sammy Most. Do you know Sammy Most?
Yep.
Now, Sammy's a fantastic player, but he doesn't play like Buster Bailey and vice versa. So what happened was, on the show, after the show, he went to the girl and he says, who the hell hired this guy? She said, what do you mean? And he said, no. He says, why did you hire this kid on clarinet? She said, well, Marty said. He said, Marty said. Who's running this show, Marty or me? That was the last time I played on the show.
Wow.
So that was it. I said, thanks a lot, Ellie. You know, but Jesus, you know. But anyway, she used to call my house to get information about who to hire, and my kids would say, Dad, it's her again. They knew she was going to be on for 3 hours because I had to say, all right, now listen, Red Allen plays well with Buster Bailey and Jason Higginbottom. Charlie Shavers plays well with anybody. You know, and tell her who plays well with who, you know. Did you ever see any of those shows?
Please write it down so that you don't have to keep calling back again and again, too, right?
Who's that?
This woman, you know. I've had people do that, you know, over and over.
She didn't know. She really didn't know. She was well-intentioned. She was a nice lady. I liked her. But I used to go, what do you say? Don't you know? Did you ever hear of Jerry Mulligan? Yeah. You know? She said, anyway, you know. So okay, now what else? Who else did I say after that? The Metropole.
You had a quartet with your brother.
Oh yeah, the Napoleon Brothers. Yeah, that was great because we used to go to my mother's house and we'd fool around at the piano. And I said, and my sister used to say, why don't you guys get a thing? So we seriously thought about it. Says, when we had the first rehearsal at my mother's house, we said, man, we worked well together. We did, because we're both piano players, we're brothers, but we never played together. You know? So we played some things together. It sounded pretty good. So we said, let's get a group. And we started rehearsing. Meanwhile, I had played the Sands Hotel with Louis' band. And the manager was Jack and Trotter, who used to run the Copacabana in New York. And Jack liked me, because I hate to say it, but every time I did a piano solo, we used to get a fantastic reaction, see. So he used to come to me, put his arm around me. I'd be walk across the casino, come. He was a big guy, 6'3". Put his arm around me, say, Marty, if you ever get a group, call me. I want you to call me. You're welcome here anytime. In fact, I think one of his letters is in there. And he said, anytime. So when Teddy and I started to rehearse, we signed. I went to Joe Glazer, and he said, well, it's hard to book 2 pianos. There are not too many little jazz clubs are going to get pianos, and which is true. They couldn't get, you know. In fact, we went into the Embers, and we had, no, was it the Embers? We had a grand piano and an upright, because we couldn't get, it was hard to get 2 grands in a little jazz club, you know. So Glazer kind of like dropped it, and I said, well, look, I got a friend of mine named George Drake. He works with Bill Burnham's office. So I called him. He says, we'll come and hear you. So they came to hear us rehearse at NOLA Studios. He said, man, you guys are great. We got the bass and the drum, Georgie Shaw and Herbie Wassam. And the group sounded fantastic. So we've been rehearsing for some time, too. And I said, listen, I said, look, Jack and Trotter has always said to me, if you ever get he says, we're going to call Jack. So they called Jack. He said, send him out. Just like that. He didn't want to hear the group. He said, he said, send him out. So they booked 4 weeks with 4 2-week options, right? And we went out there, and they loved us there. But we were playing in the lounge. Excuse me. We were playing in the lounge, and in those days, the lounge was open. See, nowadays, I think the lounges are closed, where you have to go specifically into the room to catch the show. So you either play the big room or the lounge. And we were playing in the lounge, and it was open. So now we're playing on the stand, and the bar was like a long, we were playing over here, and the bar went long that way, see? So actually we were playing out towards the audience this way, and the people are gambling there. So what happened was we were swinging so hard that the people started turning around looking at the group and keeping time with their chips. And the dealers were getting bugged. They were saying, hey, man, you guys playing or what are you doing? So the pit boss would walked over to us one day and said, hey, guys, you want to keep it down, please? Because, we're trying to make... These guys are keeping time with the chips. So we said, okay. So now we toned it down. Now we're playing for the people in the bar. But the bar was narrow and long. So the manager comes over to us and says, hey, the people out there say they can't hear you on the other end of the bar. We said, well, the pit boss said, you're working in the lounge. Don't listen to the pit boss. You listen to me. I'm the manager. So, okay. So, ding, 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 comes the pit boss. Hey, you guys. We said, what? Speak to the manager. He said, never mind the manager. We're trying to sell some money. We're trying to make some money. It went that way for 4 weeks. And when we said we're going to, they said, it's never going to work. They're not going to pick up any options. We're fighting with these guys.
Right.
They're going to throw us out pretty soon because we're going to say, hey, get lost, you guys. So after 4 weeks, we split. Now, we had the headline attraction. We were the headliners. Napoleon Brothers, and then, in fact, Barbara Carroll she's on the bill. One of the things. And then when we did 3 weeks like that, and the fourth week, we were working from midnight to 6 a.m. And my brother Andy was playing with a trio at another hotel, the Flamingo or someplace, Sahara. And he was working from 6 to midnight. He'd finished work and come over to see us. So now on the last week, we said, well, we're going to try to leave here on closing night and get a good start. We had to go to Columbus, Ohio to play a gig there. So we said switch our evening, switch our schedule. So instead of midnight to 6 a.m., they put us on from 6 p.m. to midnight. And you know what that did to it did this to our stomachs.
Oh.
It twisted us completely around because we were going to bed at 8 o'clock in the morning, getting up at 5, 6 in the night, having breakfast, and then going to work. It was crazy. Now, all of a sudden, we're getting through at midnight, and we're saying, getting stomach pains, man. It was just crazy, So what happened was they gave our spot, that's midnight to 6, to Louis Jordan's group. So one night he says to us, where are you guys going from here? We said, we're going to Columbus. We're leaving like tomorrow night or whatever, after the gig. He said, you're leaving after the gig? You're going to drive? We said, yeah. He said, let me give you a little clue, kids. Don't drive more than 200 miles. I don't care how cold it is without getting out of your car and run around the car 10 times. We said, what? He said, trust me. I think he saved our lives because we did it. We listened to him. Because we had 2 cars, we were caravan style. And we went a couple of 100 miles, we stopped, got out of the car, ran around the car. Ready, see? So that's what we did.
Yeah.
So Louis Jordan saved our lives. He was great. And then we went to Columbus, Ohio, and we played there for about 4 weeks, and it was freezing, man. We had snow and sleet and ice. And Teddy and I had a suite of rooms there, and we put the TV on just before while we were getting dressed to go to work, and the guy would say, if you don't have business out there, don't go out tonight, stay home. I said, this guy is ruining our business, man. Shut up, shut up.
Yeah.
We'd go to work, the place would be packed. We packed the room every night. They loved us. It was great. Because we had two pianos, we had two grand pianos,
Uh-huh.
and we used to play, and then we would sing like "Straighten Up and Fly Right."
Yeah.
Ba-ba-doo-doo. And then after that, we'd play fours, like I played and he played, and we'd do fours. Then we would scat fours across the pianos. Boo-ba-doo-boo-doo, and the bass and drummer played.
Uh-huh.
And we'd go, boo-ba-doo-ba-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Man, I'm telling you, I loved it. I'm so disappointed that we didn't continue on and do better with that group, because after that we went to Chicago, and it was a bad, bad, bad booking, because they booked us in there Easter week, and we had absolutely no business at all in the place, no business. So that was like our demise. You know. From there on, it was like downhill all the way. We walked on, but it's downhill. So, and then after that was what? Napoleon Brothers 55 and 66. I went back with Louis.
Yeah.
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 And funny thing is, by that time, when I was with Louis, when my kids were little, I used to call my wife twice a week. Every Thursday night and every Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Thursday night to talk to my wife, and Sunday morning because I could talk to the kids because they were sleeping. You know. And they used to cry and cry. They didn't want to talk to me. And finally, my daughter didn't want to talk. Dad, I don't want to talk. My wife would say, I said, where's Janine? She doesn't want to talk to you. Why? She's crying. She doesn't have a dad. And, you know, my daughter got on. Everybody has a daddy but me.
Yeah.
Oh, man,
Wow.
my heart broke my heart. And then, then I talked to her. Daddy's trying to make some money. I want to buy you some. I don't want those. I don't want them. So I said, okay. I finally convinced her that everything's okay. And I said, put your brother on. She says, he doesn't want to talk to you. He was a year and a half. He was
tough.
2 years old, you know. He don't want to talk to you either. He was crying, too. So I said, that's it. I went to the managers. I called him, Frenchie, I'm giving my notice. So I quit the band. See?
Yeah.
So now in 66, Glazer calls me again because what happened? Oh, he said, we're going into Jones Beach. That's what made me go back with the band. They were going into Jones Beach in New York for the summer. There was a guy Lombardi used to put a show out there every year for the whole summer. So that convinced me to say okay. You know? And I did. I went back in 66, and it's too long a story.
Wow.
But what else have we got to do?
Well, I don't want. We're going to have to do part two.
Okay.
We'll have to do part two sometime.
Oh, yeah, all right.
You know, next time I come back.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't want you to miss your ride here, but
what, is it almost 6?
it's almost 20 of.
Oh, but then let's go.
Well,
okay.
hold on for a
Oh,
second.
you want to look at some things?
Just very quickly, what's your take on the state of jazz today?
Jazz is alive. I love it. There's nothing wrong with jazz. It's just we're not getting enough exposure to the people because there are not enough radio stations play it. And like you get KCR and BGO, they're playing some far-out jazz that a lot of people don't really like to listen to. I personally, that's my personal feeling, because sometimes I listen to those stations and I don't really like what I hear.
Yeah.
Because I'm from the old jazz, you know, like Bunny Berrigan, guys like this, you know. And I love jazz, but when I listen to some of those things, you know, when they do these free fall things, it just turns me off. I just don't like it.
Right.
So I feel if I don't like it, and I'm a musician, can you imagine the average layperson who listens and says, what the hell is that?
What are they doing?
Yeah, what is that? You know what I'm saying? So I feel sad because there's you know how I know there's a market for it? I went to Europe about 5 years in a row with Peanuts Hucko. We were doing a tribute to Louis Armstrong. We had Peanuts, Trummy Young, Billy Butterfield, Jack Lesberg, and Gus Johnson. When I tell you, we went to Portugal for one night, and we played opposite a kid who was a local hero who had a hit record. He was about 23 years old, had a hit record. The kid was fantastic. He had all kinds of amplifiers and things.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
the three guys, they sounded like a whole orchestra. You know, it was great. And he had a hit record, and he was from that town. And they loved him. And we had to follow him. So now he breaks it up, I mean, completely. Now they introduce us, and we come out. And we get, you know.
Yeah.
We started to play back home again in Indiana. Well, those You never heard anything like that in your life. Clapping, stamping, cheering, whistling. Man, you guys are great, man. They went crazy. We tore it up. We had to do 4 encores. They wouldn't let us off the stage. I said, man, this is fantastic. You get these 6 old guys come out here and they say, what's going on? I worked with the world's greatest band, too, you know,
right.
the world's greatest.
Right.
Joe Marini said the world's greatest band. Everybody in the band was great. People loved it. Man, the band was swinging. I mean, when the band is swinging, the people, it gets to the people. I don't care what you say. So,
Terrific.
can we tell that guy to hold on?
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time. It's been
Did you want to look at
fantastic.
anything at all?
Sure.
Let me see what we got here. I don't know. Stop me when you see something you like. This is my father
Oh, my. Look at that.
playing piano. My uncle
Yeah,
Phil
Phil.
playing trumpet. My uncle Georgie playing violin.
Uh-huh.
My first house. My father used to do things like that.
Yeah.
This is my father, my uncle, this is my mother.
Is this you?
Yeah. After the concert, people come in the office into
Yeah.
the dressing room, and they would open up the program to your picture. And they go, oh, there's Trummy Young. Did they give me an autograph? No, they don't. And when they came to me, they were looking through the picture. And I said, oh, no, here we are. I said, oh, is that you? I said, that's it. I got to get some new pictures.
And we'll see if we can go with that.
Okay, good.
That's terrific.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Monkey, beautiful. Thank you very much. It's very comforting.
All right.
You made me talk more than I should have.
Well, no way. Appreciate it.
No, but because you know how it is when, like I remember watching the Johnny Carson show when he'd say to somebody on the show, say, yeah, well, are you making a new movie, right? And the guy say, yeah. So, oh, God. Okay, next case. You know? So you need a...
Absolutely. All right.
Thank you.